There's a feeling many avoidants carry, but rarely explain. They can be in the relationship, close to someone, spending time, talking, connecting, and still feel slightly outside of it. Not rejected, not excluded, just not fully inside. Like they're present, but not completely belonging. Like something keeps a small distance between them and the closeness they're experiencing. And no matter how safe the other person is, that feeling doesn't fully disappear. Because for many avoidants, the hardest part is not finding connection, it's feeling like they truly belong inside it. Most people think relationships are about getting close, building trust, sharing time, creating emotional connection. And for many, those things naturally lead to a sense of belonging, a feeling of, I'm inside this with you. But for the avoidant nervous system, closeness does not automatically create belonging. In fact, sometimes it does the opposite, because belonging requires something deeper than presence. It requires emotional participation, the ability to be inside the experience, not just observing it. And this is where many avoidants experience a quiet split. They can be there physically, mentally, even socially engaged, but emotionally, a part of them remains slightly outside, watching, monitoring, containing, not fully immersed. And this is not a conscious decision. It's a learned position, a way the nervous system learned to stay safe in connection. Because early on, closeness may not have felt consistently safe. It may have been unpredictable, overwhelming, or emotionally unavailable. So the system adapted. Instead of fully entering the emotional experience, it learned to stay slightly separate, close enough to connect, distant enough to remain in control. And over time, this becomes automatic. By adulthood, the avoidant can be in relationships, but not fully inside them. They participate, but they also observe. They engage, but they also regulate. They feel, but they also limit how much they feel. And this creates a subtle experience, one that's hard to explain, because nothing externally is wrong. The partner may be supportive, emotionally available, consistent, safe, but internally, something feels slightly off, like there's a thin layer between them and the connection. Not a wall, not distance, just a barrier soft enough to stay invisible, but strong enough to prevent full immersion. This is why avoidants sometimes struggle to describe what they feel, because it's not a lack of connection, it's a lack of belonging. Within that connection, they may think, everything is good, so why don't I feel fully in it? And that question doesn't have an obvious answer, because the issue is not the relationship itself, it's the position their nervous system takes inside it, slightly outside, slightly observing, slightly contained. And that position creates a quiet distance that others can feel, but rarely understand. This is also why avoidants often appear calm in emotional situations, not because they don't care, because they are not fully immersed in the same way. Part of them is always regulating, always maintaining a level of separation, always ensuring that the connection does not fully take over their internal state. And that regulation prevents something important, the feeling of belonging, because belonging requires surrender to the experience, a willingness to be inside it, without constant monitoring, without constant control. And that is exactly what the avoidance system struggles to allow. So instead, they remain close, but not fully inside, present, but not fully immersed, connected, but not fully belonging. And that quiet difference shapes everything that follows. The feeling of being an outsider does not come from the relationship itself. It comes from how the avoidance system positions itself inside connection. Because for many avoidants, closeness is not just connection, it is exposure. To be close to someone means being seen, not just your strengths, your needs, your emotions, your dependence. And for a nervous system that learned to rely on itself, that level of visibility can feel unfamiliar, even when it is safe. So instead of fully entering that emotional space, the system creates a subtle distance, not enough to disconnect, just enough to maintain control. This is where the outsider feeling begins, because belonging requires something specific: the ability to relax into the connection, to stop monitoring, to stop managing how much of you is showing, to simply be inside the experience. But the avoidance system rarely fully relaxes. It stays alert, not in a fearful way, in a controlled way. It keeps track of emotional intensity. How much is being shared? How much is expected? How much is forming? And that constant awareness prevents full immersion. There is also another layer to this experience: emotional translation. Many avoidants learned early to process emotions internally, privately, without external validation, without shared reflection. So when they enter a close relationship, they may notice something unfamiliar. The other person expresses emotions openly, shares thoughts in real time, invites connection through vulnerability. And while this can feel warm, it can also feel slightly foreign, because the avoidant is not used to co-processing emotion. They are used to self-processing. So even when they are physically present, there can be a delay, a gap between what is happening in the relationship and how they are experiencing it internally. And that gap creates distance, not visible distance, internal distance. They may think, I understand what's happening, but I don't feel it the same way. Or, I care, but I don't experience it as strongly. And that difference reinforces the feeling of being slightly outside. There is also the question of identity, because for many avoidants, their sense of self is built around independence, self-sufficiency, emotional autonomy. I handle things myself. I don't need much. I stay in control. And relationships challenge that identity, because true closeness requires interdependence, mutual reliance, shared emotional space. And when that begins forming, the avoidance system can feel a subtle tension. If I fully belong here, what happens to my independence? If I fully enter this, do I lose control? So instead of choosing one or the other, the system does something else. It stays in between, connected, but separate, engaged, but self-contained, close, but not fully merged into the experience. From the outside, this can feel confusing. The avoidant is there. They show up. They participate. They are not absent. But something feels slightly withheld, not intentionally, but consistently. And that consistency is what creates the sense of distance in the relationship, because belonging is not just about presence, it's about emotional integration. Two people sharing the same space internally, not just externally. And when one person remains slightly outside, the connection feels incomplete, even if everything else looks stable. Understanding this changes something important, because the outsider feeling is not a judgment of the relationship. It is a reflection of how the avoidance system learned to exist within closeness, close enough to connect, separate enough to stay safe. And that balance, while protective, is also what prevents the full experience of belonging. The outsider feeling doesn't stay still. It moves. It shifts, depending on the moment. Sometimes, the avoidant feels closer, more present, more connected, and in those moments, they almost feel fully inside the relationship. Almost. But then something subtle pulls them back, not dramatically, quietly. A thought, a sensation, a moment of awareness. This is getting close. And just like that, the distance returns. This creates a confusing rhythm. In, then slightly out. Close, then contained. Present, then observing again. And because this shift is internal, it rarely gets explained. The avoidant may not even have clear words for it. They just feel a need to adjust, to recalibrate, to step back just enough, to feel stable again. From the outside, this looks like inconsistency. One day they feel engaged, the next they feel distant. One moment, they seem emotionally present. The next, they seem harder to reach. And the partner tries to understand what changed, but nothing obvious did. The shift happened internally, between immersion and self-protection. This is where many people start leaning in more, trying to bring them back. More effort, more connection, more emotional presence. But this creates an unintended effect, because when the avoidant is already feeling slightly outside, additional intensity doesn't pull them in. It increases the need for space, because now there is more to manage, more emotion, more expectation, more closeness to regulate. So instead of moving closer, they stabilize by stepping back again. This creates a quiet loop. You feel the distance. You move closer. They feel the intensity. They move back. You feel more distance. You try again. They withdraw further, not abruptly, but gradually, until the connection feels uneven. One person trying to deepen, hoping that if they do enough, the avoidant will finally feel fully present. But this creates a quiet imbalance, because the more you try to pull someone in, the more their system feels the need to hold its position, not against you, for stability. The other trying to regulate. Inside the avoidant, something else is happening. They are aware of the connection. They may even value it deeply, but at the same time, they feel a subtle pressure to maintain their position, not fully inside, not fully dependent, not fully immersed, because full immersion feels like losing their center, losing control. So they stay in a middle space where connection exists, but independence is still intact. And this is the quiet cost, because that middle space protects them, but also limits what they can experience, the depth, the emotional safety that comes from fully being with someone, the sense of shared reality, of we are in this together. That level of belonging requires something the avoidance system struggles to allow. Letting go of constant regulation, letting go of the need to stay slightly separate, letting the connection actually reach them. But when that doesn't happen, the relationship can feel incomplete, not broken, not wrong, just not fully alive. And both people can feel it. One feels they can't fully reach, the other feels they can't fully arrive. Understanding this pattern changes the way you interpret the distance, because it's not always about you. It's about where they are standing, inside the connection, not outside the relationship, but not fully inside it either. And until that position changes, the experience remains the same. Close, but not fully shared. Connected, but not fully belonging. The most important thing to understand about this pattern is that belonging is not something you can give them. You can offer safety, consistency, emotional openness. But you cannot make someone feel inside a connection if their system is still standing slightly outside of it, because belonging is not created by the relationship alone. It is allowed by the nervous system. And if the system is still organized around self-protection, around independence, around emotional containment, then no matter how good the connection is, a part of them will remain separate. This is where many people lose themselves. They sense the distance. They feel that something is missing, so they try to close the gap. More understanding, more patience, more emotional effort, hoping that if they do enough, the avoidant will finally feel fully present. But this creates a quiet imbalance, because the more you try to pull someone in, the more their system feels the need to hold its position, not against you, for stability. So the shift is not in trying harder, it's in seeing clearly. You begin to recognize what is actually happening, not rejection, not lack of care, but a limit in how deeply they can currently experience belonging. And once you see that, you stop chasing the feeling of almost. You stop trying to complete a connection that never fully forms on both sides. Because here is the deeper truth. You can have connection without belonging. You can have presence without emotional arrival. You can have a relationship that functions but never fully settles into something shared at the deepest level. And for a while, that can feel enough. But over time, most people start feeling what's missing, the difference between being with someone and feeling like you're truly in it together. This is where your awareness becomes power, because once you can name the dynamic, you can choose how you respond to it, not reactively, not emotionally, but consciously. You ask yourself, am I experiencing real belonging here? Or am I adapting to someone who stays slightly outside? And that question changes everything. Because the strongest position you can take is not trying to be enough for someone else's system. It's understanding what your system needs, what kind of connection actually allows you to feel grounded, seen, met, fully inside the relationship. And when you reach that level of clarity, something shifts. You stop chasing partial presence. You stop negotiating with emotional distance. You stop trying to earn belonging. And instead, you start choosing connections where belonging is mutual, natural, not something you have to fight for. If this gave you a deeper understanding of avoidant attachment, then you're starting to see something most people never fully see. Not just behavior, but the internal experience behind it, the quiet patterns, the emotional positions, the invisible dynamics that shape connection without being spoken. And that is exactly what we explore here on the Inner Odyssey, the psychology behind emotional distance, the hidden structures inside relationships, the patterns that repeat until you finally recognize them. So if you want to understand relationships at this level, subscribe to the Inner Odyssey, because once you see these patterns clearly, you stop trying to fix what confuses you and you start choosing what actually aligns with you.